I want to introduce we have our presenters tonight. You'll be hearing from Diane Hannibert, who is the Capital Project Manager for the City of Anacortes in their Stormwater program, and Reed Armstrong, who is an environmental scientist, and he works for Colshan Services. I guess you guys just changed your name, the Peak Sustainability Group. And we have David Roberts also on with us, and he also is with Peak Sustainability Group. We really appreciate their involvement and their expertise with this workshop. And I see that I think we also have a few other staff that are on here that if you have specific questions that maybe they'll be able to help you in your own jurisdiction. But David Lee, I know is on here with the city of Cedar Woolley. I believe Keith Love with the Port of Skagit County. If he's not on, he was planning on joining us. Jason Quigley with Skagit County. And looks like Andrew Wargle with Skagit County is on here. And we have Daniel Hotel with the city of Mount Vernon. And I hope I'm not missing anybody, but anyway, that's that. And then just to kind of go over some of the kind of logistics. So if you have a question at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat box. You can click on that and type your question in. That way you won't forget, and we'll make sure we address all the questions. We plan on doing a Q&A at the end of the workshop, but both, I know Reed and Diane will be taking some questions. They'll call for them during their presentation. So if something comes up, you'll get a chance then as well. And we would just like to ask that you stay muted during the presentations until the Q&A portion, and use the chat box if you can. So with that, I think I'll quickly go over the agenda. Hopefully all of you received your handbooks in the mail, which included the agenda in there. So we'll be starting out with the municipal overview with Diane Hannibert, City of Anacortes. And at 6 o'clock, Reed Armstrong will provide the nuts and bolts of stormwater system management. And then I'll be given just a brief presentation after Reed on how, if you're with an HOA particularly, or actually just being involved in your community, on how you can involve your neighbors and why that's important. And then we'll open it up for questions, and we'll adjourn at 7. That's the plan. So with that, I think we'll let Diane share her screen and we'll get started. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am actually in the middle of my presentation here. Let's get it back. Oop. Give me just one moment. It worked great when we were doing our setup. There we go. Now let's try this. All right. Hopefully you're seeing municipal stormwater management. My name's Diane Hannibert. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Anacortes. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about what your cities and county do, and kind of give you the overview of storm systems. And then Reed can get into the detailed instructions of how these systems work and how to maintain them. The resources to get started. Let's see, Why isn't this? There we go. So why do we try and manage stormwater? First part is flow control. We want to prevent flooding in developed areas, so our drainage systems takes the rainwater and moves it away from our streets and from our homes to prevent flooding. Now, detention ponds play a part in this because they can hold the water and release it slowly to mimic a more natural rate of flow. When you have rain and all this water coming off these hard surfaces, it will just go racing downstream if we don't capture it and slow it down. And that fast moving water can create a lot of erosion and quite a bit of flooding. The other piece is water quality. We want water leaving the system to be as close as possible to natural conditions, and ponds and even to a degree catch basins will slow the water down and allow some of the sediment to drop out. And in facilities like large parking lots, you'll put in oil water separators that will then be able to skim the oil off the top before it enters into the storm system. And low impact development features like bioswales and rain gardens will allow the water to infiltrate into the ground and be filtered naturally before it gets into our waterways. A lot of these regulations come from the top. The Cuyahoga River caught on fire because it was so polluted, and that brought up a lot of public discussion and started with the significant change that came with the Clean Water Act of 1972, as the government started to realize the importance of limiting dumping into our water bodies. So the Clean Water Act came down through the EPA, and part of that was the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, which is kind of the second level down here, was part of that mandate. And here in Washington State, the NPDES program has been handed to the Department of Ecology for permitting. So they have a wide variety of permits where they limit what is released into our waterways. Some of them in the private sector, like the industrial stormwater permit for industrial facilities, the boatyard permit, the sand and gravel, construction. And then there's also the utility-based permits. So the water treatment plant for Anacortes has its own NPDES permit, and so does our wastewater treatment plant. I'm here because my job is to oversee our municipal stormwater permit. A lot of the local requirements that you have are a result of this NPDES program. We have requirements for our stormwater programs to ensure what's going in our neighborhoods is protecting water quality. And maintenance of privately owned stormwater facilities comes in, that bottom row is all of our minimum requirements for our permits, and it comes in under controlling runoff from developments and operations and maintenance. So before European settlement here, this area was full of greenery and large trees. And when it would rain, the trees and the vegetation would take up this rainwater to aid in photosynthesis. And what it couldn't use, it would release through evapotranspiration. What the plants didn't pick up got soaked up by these nice spongy soils that we have and would go down into groundwater or have subsurface flow until it gets to our waterways. But as we've been developing the land and building roads and buildings, this natural system for soaking up the rain has been disrupted. These hard surfaces like pavement don't soak up any water at all. It doesn't allow for much infiltration. So we have the system of catch basins and pipes and ditches to help move the water away. And what we want to try and do is limit the negative impacts of this water as we're moving it away from our facilities. So some of the basic components of a stormwater system I'll go over now, and then Reed will talk in a little bit more depth about these systems and how to maintain them. But your stormwater system, it starts with the downspouts from buildings and the catch basins in the street, and it ends in our local waterways. We have all these facilities to move the water, and sometimes it then goes through a stormwater facility along the way, like a detention pond or a vault or some kind of low impact development facility. So here's an aerial view of some of the typical stormwater facilities in Anacortes. This is part of our GIS mapping system. And you can see all of the little pink squares are catch basins in our roads. And then the purple lines are the pipes, and they usually have a directional arrow to show which way the water is flowing. So you can see where it collects on our roadways, and then a lot of it goes, the part that looks like a little tail is a bioswale, and I'll talk about those in a minute. And then the big part, big orange part, is a pond. So the water goes into the stormwater pond, and then it collects out and runs to that blue line where it's discharged. And that blue line is the Ace of Hearts Creek. So everything that's coming off these roadways goes into Ace of Hearts Creek and then out to Fidalgo Bay. And that's why, in the stormwater world, we really try to emphasize only rain down the drain, because everything that goes into these catch basins is going to our waterways. It does not go to the wastewater treatment plant. So the first piece we'll talk about is a catch basin, or oftentimes called a storm drain. It's typically the first place that stormwater enters. It's an underground structure that collects the runoff off our roads and parking lots. And it allows the water to slow down a little bit, some of the dirt and sediment and trash to settle out. A well-maintained catch basin will help improve water quality. Here in the drawing, we have what we call a type 1 catch basin. A type 2 is generally larger and circular, and we usually refer to those as manholes, but they function pretty much the same. So in neighborhood developments, stormwater often goes to a detention pond. They're engineered and constructed when the development is being built, and they're there due to the increase of the hard surfaces, the roofs, the roads, the sidewalks that are replacing the natural environment, and allow the greater development, allows them to capture the water and then slowly release it into the storm system. In newer developments, often pond sizes are decreasing, not because there's less rainwater, but because there typically are a lot more low impact development features being put in overall, whether it's rain gardens for the houses, so everything that comes off the roof is being infiltrated on site instead of going to the storm pond, or permeable pavement. There are a lot of different options. So basic pond components, I'll go through and then talk about the difference between a wet pond and a dry pond. The big ones with the pond, the inlet where the water comes in, the outlet where the water goes out, and the berm, which is the wall that holds everything in place. Wet ponds are designed to have water year round. They're usually lined with clay or plastic so that the water doesn't all infiltrate into the ground, and you can keep that year-round pool. They work because the water comes in and slows down, and the pollutants have a chance to settle out to the bottom. There can be some uptake by vegetation in and around the pond that will help capture some of that, and the rest resides in the sediments at the bottom. So periodically, you need to clean out the sediment out of the bottom of your pond to keep it functioning properly. Dry ponds are not always recognizable as a stormwater facility. They usually just look like a big grassy field. They facilitate infiltration because they have no liner. So when the water comes in, it has a chance to soak into the ground. And a well-maintained pond typically should dry out within a week of a rain event. Now here in Western Washington, we get rain from, early November until May, sometimes continuously. So it is possible to have a dry pond that spends a significant amount of the year with water in it. That does not necessarily mean that it's failing. So with your inlet and outlet pipes, they often have trash racks, which are the bars that you see in the picture here. The trash rack keeps debris and animals and children out of the storm pipes. And underneath the inlets, there's often riprap, which are those big rocky pieces underneath, usually about 12 inches in diameter. And those act as a splash pad to prevent erosion. So when the water comes pouring in during heavy rains, it's not sloughing away the soil, but the rocks can absorb that energy. The control structure is the last point before water leaves a pond, and it's a really critical piece of the infrastructure. It controls the rate that the water exits the pond. You want to mimic a natural flow rate off the site, like would have been in pre-developed conditions. So what you have is you have a riser and an orifice. So the riser is the upright pipe that you can see in the picture on the right. And then the bottom of that riser has a plate on it with an orifice, which is just a specifically sized hole that controls how fast the water can leave the pond. Control spaces or control structures are confined spaces. So if you need to do some kind of maintenance to your control structure, you have to have someone who is confined space certified and trained for these kinds of repair and maintenance. I know the ladder may look really easy just to climb down in and take a look, but confined spaces can be deadly, and it's really, really important that you have someone with that certification going in there. And then there's the overflow and spillway. So this allows excess water to leave if during a really heavy rainstorm, the pond gets full up to the brim. Sometimes it's a small cut on the top of the berm that's filled with riprap, like on the right, that allows water to spill out without causing erosion and eroding away the berm. And sometimes it's a beehive structure, like on the left, that can move water out of the pond really quickly to prevent overtopping. As I've said several times, a big piece of all of this is slowing the flow of the water. And these are some of the ways that we can encourage the slowing of the flow. On the left is a rock baffle that's part of a dry detention pond. And on the right side, those are small check dams in a swale that can help slow the water down and allow things to settle out. Now, sometimes you want to keep an eye on these because sometimes rocks will come out of place, whether it be from erosion or local children. If I had something like this in my neighborhood growing up, I would have had a heyday building all kinds of new structures with it. So you do want to keep an eye and put them back together if they come apart. And then there's berms and dams. You know, the berms are the earthen walls of the stormwater pond, and they determine the capacity of the pond to hold water. And if an earthen wall is not possible for some reason, then sometimes concrete walls will be used for the perimeter of the pond. And a really important thing to note about your pond is that if your pond is above ground, it's not sunk down below the general elevation of the neighborhood, it's extra important to keep a close eye on the berms to make sure that you don't wind up flooding your neighborhood. And then fences. Most engineering standards require that stormwater ponds with steep slopes have a fence for public safety. Generally, it's if the slope is greater than 3:1, or if the perimeter is made of concrete walls, then you'll be required to have a fence around it and keep that fence in place. And then getting to your ponds is something that sometimes can be overlooked until you actually need to maintain it. You know, if you look at the aerial photograph on the right, it looks pretty good. You know, you've got the pathway in, but if you're trying to bring in a Vactor truck or a big mower to maintain this pond, you've got the vegetation that's encroaching on the drive up by the cul-de-sac. You've got fences that run right along the edge, and it might be too narrow to be able to actually get a Vactor truck back there. So while it might look clear, you really need to make sure that these ponds are accessible for larger equipment when needed. So we've talked a lot about ponds, but bioswales are also something that are really common in neighborhoods and commercial developments. They're wide, shallow, vegetated channels with really gentle slopes and flat bottoms. So you look at it and it looks like a grassy ditch, and to a degree, it's actually a fancy engineered grassy ditch. They usually have a real gentle slope so that the water goes really slowly. The grass is a really important piece. It helps to filter out pollution and suck up water for photosynthesis. If it's designed properly and maintained, it can go a long ways to infiltrating and cleaning stormwater as it slowly makes its way through. And they can be anywhere in the stormwater system. You often see them alongside roads. They're really effective with capturing road runoff, but they can pop up all over the place. Now, modifying swales can really reduce their ability to slow and treat rainwater, which then ultimately contributes to flooding. You know, it might be tempting to fill it in and cover it up with rock for a parking pad like some other neighborhoods had, but then you lose all of that capacity for stormwater and all of that treatment. And the neighborhoods that have those gravel parking pads were probably permitted and built before your jurisdiction had an MPDS permit. And that's why they got away with it. So the first thing you need to do is know your specific facility. Each pond is different depending on the location and the design and how much area it's draining. Most ponds are going to have the features that I've mentioned previously. Usually the developer will pass the plan sets on to the HOA. So you may already have those plans in your possession. If you don't have them, a combination of a little research and a little field work can be really helpful in determining what components you have and what it is that you're responsible for maintaining. Or you can always hire a contractor if you prefer to come in and figure it out and set up your maintenance plan for you. So if you're looking for records, if you don't already have them in your possession from the developer, you can find different information in different places. Plat map for the area will generally tell you who's responsible for the facility, whether it's being signed over to the HOA or if the city has ownership or maintenance requirements for it. And that will always be site specific. And then construction drawings will be useful for your pond specs for the elevation depth, the capacity, where the control structure is, what size the orifice is, all the things that you need to know to restore your pond. And an operations and maintenance guide is really helpful. The recommended maintenance is often included in the CC&Rs, but not always. And also you want to know about easements, which are usually on the plat map, but sometimes it's just a written description and some paperwork somewhere. That's really helpful for accessing your pond. So where do you find all of these documents? A great resource is the Skagit County IMAP. You can click on the parcel in IMAP, and then once you open up the parcel, you can click on Assessor Property Details. And then under the recorded documents, you can find all the recorded documents, which would include the plat map and easements and things along those lines. Or if you see an auditor's file number on something, you can go to the auditor's website and look up that file directly. If you're having trouble with that, go into City Hall. I know Anacortes and I think most of the other jurisdictions we have on our website, you can access a lot of these records through our interactive map. But if you're having trouble, you know, go in, they'll know what to look for and where to look for it and are happy to help you out, especially if you're interested in performing maintenance on your stormwater facilities. Another useful thing is aerial photos. They don't always line up perfectly. So if you're using like the distance measurements on it, it may or may not line up quite right. It's not a substitute for a professional survey, but it can be really helpful to look at the aerial, especially if you have your site plans with you, because then you can see maybe where a catch basin might just have plants overgrowing it, and that's why you can't find it, or what might be going on with your facility. So those can be really helpful also. So once you've got all of your information, then you get to go out and check it out. So you can bring all your records, start poking around, see what you can find. And sometimes if something seems to be missing, It might be buried by gravel or mulch or covered by vegetation. I had one site that I was inspecting. It was a commercial facility outside of Skagit County, and they had, the landscapers had been trimming the ivy really beautiful over their big, tall manhole. And so at first I couldn't find it, and I finally figured out it was hiding under this ivy, and we just actually needed to weed whack it all down to actually find it instead of turning it into yard art. And a metal detector can be handy for finding lids if you're really having a tough time. So keeping an eye on your facility is a really great way to learn about it. You know, get a baseline during dry weather. What does it look like when it's been dry for a while? When we get a good rainstorm coming in, how fast does your pond fill up? The water that's coming in, what does it look like? Is it clear? Is it pretty murky looking? What kinds of things are you seeing floating in there? And then after the rainstorm ends, keep an eye on it. How quickly do the pond levels drop? Is it flowing out at a normal rate? If it doesn't seem to be dropping at all, you know, is there something blocking the outlet that's preventing the water from leaving? Or sometimes you get things blocking the orifice in the control structure that, again, will stop the water from leaving the pond. And so keeping an eye on it throughout the year will really give you an idea of when things start to change, or when a problem arises, you'll recognize that this is not how it's normally functioning during storms. So what if you don't have an operations and maintenance plan? There's nothing in the CC&Rs, you haven't found anything in any of the paperwork. You can look at the Department of Ecology's Stormwater Management Manual for Western Washington. Volume 5, Appendix 5A has maintenance standards. This was updated in 2019. If going through and trying to find that is frustrating, please give your local stormwater department a call, because I promise you, myself and all of my counterparts, we know exactly where to find these things, and we would be happy to send you a link just to that exact section that you need. You can also hire people. There are a lot of contractors out there that are really knowledgeable and can help you, can come out and take a look at your site and tell you what you need to do and get you on a regular maintenance schedule. If you do all these things, keep an eye on your pond, regularly inspect it, do maintenance, it can save you a lot of money in the long run. And I'll show you a couple of reasons why. Trees. Mowing 1, 2, 3 times a year will keep your vegetation at an acceptable level and keeps trees from taking root in your berm, on your pond bottom. Alders and cottonwoods love the moist soils in our ponds, and they grow fast. They can reach 65 feet tall in 20 years, and then they break over. They're falling on people's fences. They're taking up capacity in your pond. And a tree clearing project is much more expensive than mowing once or twice a year to keep those little saplings down. But mowing isn't always enough. Here's a great picture of a pond where the berms have been beautifully maintained and mowed, but the areas the mower can't reach were left alone. And the alders there on the divider in the pond grew to 50 feet tall. And then one of them toppled over. In that picture on the bottom right, you can see the red circle and see where the alder tipped over, and the root ball on the alder took up a big chunk of the divider with it. So now not only do you have to come in and get out those trees, but you also have to reconstruct the berm to maintain the structural integrity. So coming through with loppers and a weed whacker, you know, once, twice a year, get the big woody things out, can really save you a lot of money in the long run. Another thing we get a lot of questions about in the stormwater world are mosquitoes. They're a nuisance and a disease vector, but ponds and swales aren't a likely source. Dry ponds should be dry during the summer. Wet ponds should be deep enough that the mosquitoes don't like them. They like shallower water. Catch basins sometimes can harbor mosquito larvae, and some municipalities do treat their catch basins. But if you want treatment to go on in your stormwater facilities, you do need someone with a pesticide license to apply the pesticides. If you're seeing a lot of problems with mosquitoes, the first thing you should check are kiddie pools, buckets, gutters of houses. Those are the first places that mosquitoes are going to go for. And our last big item is reporting spills, anything you see in your storm system. Stormwater flows to our nearest water bodies, whether it's the Skagit River or, well, creeks that feed to the Skagit River and then into the Salish Sea. And usually there's no treatment before it hits these waterways. So if you see something, say something. When I finish my presentation, I will put the spill hotline numbers for each jurisdiction in the chat box. Even if you're not sure, go ahead and give us a call. We'd love to come out and take a look, because if there's a problem, we really want to take care of it before it hits the waterways. And if you think it might be something hazardous, call 911. And if it's after hours, you can call 911. The dispatchers are trained for who they need to call within our public works department in an after hours or a weekend situation. And also some jurisdictions, Anacord is included, have an online reporting option where you can go to the website, report it that way. You can attach pictures, give them any information they need, and then the email will go directly out to the relevant people. So to wrap it up, know your pond, maintain it, and if you see something wrong, give us a call. And here is some contact information for each jurisdiction. These are people that do the same job I do in Burlington, Mount Vernon, Sedro-Woolley, and Skagit County. We're happy to help you out, answer your questions, help provide you with plan sets, and do what we can to help you with your facilities. So that wraps up my part of the conversation. Reed will get into the details of some of this maintenance, but if you have any questions, now's a great time to throw them out.
We have a couple of questions that have come in, Diane, from our viewers here tonight. Let me just bring up this document. I've been putting it in here. One was, Joshua asked, is there any certification needed for performing work on stormwater systems?
The control structure, you need confined space entry and, you know, someone who knows what they're doing. For something like mowing the pond, there's not specific certification requirements. But if you're doing repairs, you're going to want someone who's got some experience.
And of course, if there's something that is significant, like a berm or something, you're going to want an engineer to look at it, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So Alyssa has a complicated spot with shared ownership of a retention pond. I'm going to paraphrase here. Lots of inspection orders sent to all 4 property owners that are responsible, but who's actually responsible for the maintenance? The neighbors have not maintained the pond at all, aside from the other half. The property owner there sometimes cleans up vegetation.
Is this sounds like maybe there is not an HOA set up for the owners of this pond?
It says there was supposed to be a future HOA, but it was never established.
I would contact whoever your stormwater representative is. I would think on the plat map, there should be something. And if it does just say that the HOA is responsible, then they may need to form an HOA to get this work done. It could be an HOA that really only meets for stormwater issues, if that's the only need or desire for one. But it should be the responsibility of the whole neighborhood financially.
Okay, and Frank and Jerry asked, are maintenance records kept by an agency, municipal, or state?
It depends on the maintenance records. So in Anacortes, the privately owned ponds would track their own maintenance records, and the city tracks inspections that we do of privately owned ponds. And then the city tracks all the maintenance we do on the city-owned ponds. And then we report to the Department of Ecology every year. And so, but the actual maintenance, mowing of the pond or something like that, that would be done by the HOA.
And they're just to maintain their own records. Correct?
Right.
And the last one before we move forward with Reed was just to, Billy asked if the presentations will be available by email after this concludes. And we are recording the presentation, and I'm assuming that one of you can make it available to other people. Is that possible?
Oh, yeah.
Website or something?
I'd be very happy to email out my presentation to anyone who wants it.
And how about the video? Do you think that could be shared online someplace?
Yes, we can get all that out to everybody with a link. So yes, we'd be happy to get it out.
Okay, very good, Christy. Well, do you want to go ahead and queue up Reed now? And he's all set to go for the second part of the program.
Sure, I'll get
Keep
my
those questions coming.
get my slide up here. I'll take a couple of breaks throughout the presentation and cover a few questions if there's any more. All right. All right, well, thank you, Diane, for that great introduction to stormwater, and I'll try not to bore you folks with too much repetition. She covered kind of the basics of what we're looking for and what to expect to find out there, and I'm going to dive in a little more about some of the maintenance standards to look for and the timing, how often to look at these things. I've been doing stormwater for the last 5 years, and have been to a number of stormwater facilities, and I can say every one has their own unique problems, and sometimes good features, and sometimes features that you just got to keep an eye on. So let's get going here. All right, so the topics we'll cover are the importance of maintenance, first steps. In the systems overview, we'll talk about the key maintenance concerns and inspection activities to undertake, what to do, when to do it, and who should be doing it. And we'll briefly discuss record keeping and what liabilities to keep in mind, and how to plan for current and future needs. So why is maintenance important? Well, as Diane told us, we're going to save money, and that's just like on your car or your house. You're going to make these regular investments of upkeep that really in the long run they pay off by preventing really more catastrophic, expensive maintenance that comes up when you fail to do that regular maintenance. Maintenance, or the stormwater systems, are designed to need regular maintenance. They're a very dynamic system. We've always got inputs of the debris and sediment coming in that are going to need to be kept flowing through the system, and then at times removed when they build up. Properly functioning system is going to protect aquatic ecosystems, and as we've discussed, we want to really eliminate that flooding and any potential liability that could come with it, because we've removed all the pervious surfaces, and these impervious surfaces have now required the need for these systems. What are the first steps? You want to find out what you own, get familiar with your system, what you're required to do, and get out there and assess what kind of condition it's in. So here's kind of an overview of your typical neighborhood stormwater system. I think I got a laser pointer I can pull up. Here we go. So Diane gave you guys a nice little overview. Our stormwater is anything that's not getting absorbed into the ground, and it's originating on these impervious surfaces that development bring with them. So we have rooftops, driveways. So rainwater hits this, it is directed to catch basins. And these are connected by pipes, which then direct it to the treatment area, which here in this one, we see a pond. As it works its way through the pond, it slows down by the control structure and then eventually released into the waterway, usually a stream. In this corner, we have the what's known as the low impact development, or LID. And so this is what you see in a lot of the newer developments, and some of the newer developments, they've eliminated ponds altogether by managing all the stormwater with low impact development. So here, this would be an example of permeable pavement. The water will actually just trickle right down through the pavement and then into the ground, back into the groundwater. This would be like your downspout to your connected to a rain garden or a bioswale. Both features, stormwater features that can allow water to infiltrate back into the ground rather than continue over the surface. What are you required to do and when? You're going to have some different requirements depending on where your city, what city you're in, or if you're in an urban growth area. Diane gave you a lot of good resources, who to reach out to in your particular area and get the lowdown. These are the different stormwater system components we're going to discuss. We have ditches, pipes, catch basins, ponds, vaults, bioswales, and rain gardens. I'm going to pause really quick. Were there any questions there, David?
Nothing right now. There,
All right.
I would say Diane did post the phone numbers for each community for reporting skills. So if you're interested in that, you might want to make a note from the chat. So go ahead, Reed.
All righty. Okay, so starting off with ditches, you want to inspect these monthly and after large storms. The main things, as Diane mentioned, there's these check dams to slow down this, to slow the flow of water. You want to check for sediment behind those, remove if it's building up, and keep the structure in place. You want to look at the vegetation growing in the ditch. You don't want any trees or shrubs in the flow path, and you don't want to leave any of the vegetation you cut in the ditch. You want to remove everything. Keep an eye out for yard waste dumping, and also as the vegetation dies back before winter, it's a good opportunity to go in and clear that out so that it doesn't just contribute to clogging downstream. Other thing to look for is the structure of the ditch. Pay attention to any scouring or slumping, any erosion that you see going on. As far as your ditches, who's going to be maintaining these? If it's in a private road, that's going to be the owner's responsibility. And typically your ditches, catch basins that you have in the roads in a city are going to be maintained by the city. And next we'll talk about pipes. You want to inspect these monthly and after large storm events, just like ditches. Most stormwater facilities use pipes to convey water underground, and you see culverts to get water under roads and driveways. And then typically these pipes are connecting catch basins throughout the system and then conveying that to a pond at the end. Even though the pipes are underground, it's important to know approximately where they're located, and you want to regularly check that they're not getting filled with sediment. There's the standard of having the sediment removed if it's exceeding 20% of the diameter of the pipe. You'll want to walk around your property, preferably when there's flowing water. That helps locate these things. And let's see here. You want to take a look at the inlets and outlets where these pipes either enter the storm system or come into a catch basin. Look for any erosion. Sometimes it's roots from trees could be growing in, causing some clogging. And if you see any damage to the pipe, sometimes they kind of bent in, or the volume of the pipe has been compromised. You'll want to try to bend that back or fix that issue. We'll move on to the type 1 catch basins. These are the smaller catch basins. You'll want to check these monthly, and after storms, it's always good to check that grate. Make sure you don't have any. A lot of times in the fall, when the wind's blowing and the rain's coming at the same time, you have these grates get clogged up. And so it's a good thing when you're out walking the dog to make sure to clear those off, keep any water from getting backed up. Annually, you'll want to check the interior to look for sediment. And with type 1 catch basins, the standard you're looking for is you don't want the sediment to be more than 60% of the sump depth, or within 6 inches of the invert clearance. So in our example here, you can see this is the outlet pipe, and from the bottom, that would be what we call the invert. From there to the bottom of the sump, or the bottom of the catch basin, is what we call the sump area. So when this area is 60% filled with sediment, that's when you know it's time to consider cleaning it out. When you're assessing these, there's some precautions you want to take. The lids are heavy, and whether you're working with round lids or square lids, a round lid won't go down the hole, but if you have a square lid, you want to have a really good grip on that and make sure that it's not going to fall down the hole when you try to remove it. Sometimes you'll need a shovel to kind of remove grass around the perimeter of the grate before you can pull it up, or sometimes a sledgehammer is useful to kind of break loose some of the rust that forms around the seam. Another thing to do as you're looking down the catch basin is to look at the grouting, make sure all that's intact and there's no cracking going on. And on the type 2 catch basin, serving the similar purpose, taking the stormwater and giving it a spot to settle, and then water is going to come off the outlet. On these, they're much larger, so we're talking about confined spaces. Again, you need to have proper training, and no one should enter a confined space without proper training because of the toxic gas hazard. Every year you hear sad reports about someone thought they could just make a quick little change or something, but when they get down there, they're overwhelmed and can't crawl back out. You want to check your type 2 catch basins, same as type 1s annually and after large storms. The standard on how full of sediment these larger basins are is slightly different. We're looking at 1/3 rather than that 60%. And rather than 6 inches to the invert, we want to have 12 inches to the invert. Here's a couple of examples of the catch basin being cleaned. This would be a Vector truck, and they can bring this hose, stretch it out to the basin, and suck out all the debris. It's good to have, when you call out the Vector truck, if you're having them come clean basins in your neighborhood, you'll want to make sure you have talk to them about which ones you want done, kind of make a plan. And best way to do that is checking your sediment depth. And so if you get a probe, such as we typically use a chimney sweep rod. You can also use like an avalanche probe. I think you can pick those up at REI or sporting goods stores. And you probe down and can check how deep the sediment is. Once you've determined which ones are going to be cleaning, that's how you can schedule with the Vector truck to come out and get the ones that need it, and avoid having them spend any time on ones that are already clean. So we're going to talk about the stormwater pond. We have in this picture 2 inlets, and it's pretty common to have more than one inlet, often from different parts of the neighborhood. But everything's going to gather in the pond and then find its way to the outlet. You see the trash racks covering all of these outlets, and that riprap to prevent erosion. And then here, this outlet is leading to the control structure, which is going to be in the type 2 catch basin. So these are the typical components of a stormwater pond that we'll talk about. There's a access ramp to allow you to come in and dredge out the pond as it fills with sediment over time. And you have energy dissipators here to prevent erosion. Your emergency overflow allows water to dump out of the pond in case the control structure becomes clogged. So if this pipe here were clogged or your orifice was clogged, the pond will fill up. And then this is a rocked area in the berm that's a little lower. So water will spill out here, kind of just bypass the control structure. Move on to some examples of dams, berms, spillways, and ramps. We have, this is a big earthen dam or berm. This is one that's above ground, so you'd really want to be sure no trees are going to become established on this. Keep an eye out for erosion. You can see here they've added some wood chips to help where there are some bare soils. This is an example of a spillway. You'd see it's just this lower rocked spot behind the control structure. And there's an example of an access ramp. We have gated entry and kind of a rocked embankment. So talk a little bit about trees and the perimeter of your stormwater pond. The trees are often planted for aesthetics and stabilization, temperature control reasons, but they have to be managed to maintain problems. The trees could clog pipes. You could have structural failure of the berm if the tree were to blow down. or if the tree dies, then the roots die back, and that can actually cause what we call piping, where it creates a place for water to flow. Then you also have to consider the leaf litter input of deciduous trees. Every year, they're just adding more leaves to your pond if they're hanging over. Like David was mentioning, that big leaf maple in his pond that contributes. And then also the tree shade can contribute to erosion, where if you're trying to grow grass on the pond and you've got trees shading that out, sometimes you have to find a more shade tolerant grass that can help control erosion where the tree shade is causing problem. Speaking of erosion, here's berm failure is one of the real large concerns with a pond that is above ground. So always be on the lookout for erosion. Try to reestablish grass anywhere that you're having issues with bare soils, and also keeping an eye out for burrowing animals. And also you can see like in this lower picture, there's some slumping going on. All things to be aware of. Trees versus grass around the berm. We talked about, trees there's some nice features with trees, but you really just need to be cautious about where you put them, and make sure you consider access, visibility, shading, being able to inspect the sides of the berm, and then leaf and debris management. So oftentimes grass is the best for your berm, and few small trees that aren't going to be in a place where they could blow down or cause any issues could be okay. Just have to have the right considerations. Dams, berms, and spillways should all be inspected quarterly and after major storms. And keep in mind the controlling vegetation, repairing erosion, looking for any structural problems. If that slumping or settling is over 4 inches, you should consult with an engineer, and then protect that overflow. Keep it well armored from erosion, and don't let trees or vegetation grow in that water path. And on the lookout for burrowing animals. Your inlets and outlets of the pond, you gotta keep an eye out on these for, especially the outlet during large storms. Make sure you're not getting a large buildup on the trash rack, and the water level starting to rise on you. Find your inlets and outlets by walking around the pond, and it's usually a good idea if you can to get like a fence post and mark these areas around your pond so that they're easy to find. When at high water levels, it might be completely submerged, and if you have that fence post there, you'll be able to know where to look. Make sure to always keep an eye out for any erosion. You just want to make sure none of that soil is ending up in your pond, because then it becomes sediment that you'll have to remove later. We talked a little bit about the energy dissipators. Here's an example of a couple. Is that large riprap placed right below the water path so that it will break up the energy. On the pond bottom, you want to inspect annually, and during the dry season, it's is the best time to do this. But also after major storms, just get a look at those inlets and outlets, make sure the water levels look as expected. Other things to look for in your pond bottom. If you have cattails that are covering more than 25 to 50% of the pond bottom, that's usually an indicator that your pond's starting to fill with sediment. The recommendation is to have sediment removed once it's over a foot. So, and that's kind of like a foot throughout. Oftentimes your sediment mostly accumulates right at your inlets, but all ponds are different. And sometimes you can get away with just kind of removing a plume of sediment that's formed right at the inlet, and the rest of the pond has not taken on so much sediment. But each pond's a little bit different depending on how it's designed. You'll want to get any trees and woody vegetation out of the pond bottom. That just adds to your sediment and leaf litter every year. If you have a liner, keep an eye on that, repair it if needed, and then always be on the lookout for trash or any chemical spills or oil that might make it into your pond. Talked a little bit about cattails. Here's a picture of, this is David's pond in his neighborhood, and they have some very large cattails. I was telling him we might have the record for the county. I don't, or for what, this was in Whatcom County, but I don't know if any of your ponds look like that, but that is a pond that would need to be considered for dredging, removing that sediment. They build up organic matter every year and grow up and then die back. Couple options depending on how extensive your cattail growth is. If it's not too bad, you may be able to cut and remove them annually to try to have some control. Keeping whatever you remove from the pond is going to be sediment that you don't have to remove later. So it might be easier. You can get it out while it's still in cattail form. And also, you know, they'll come out when you, if you do end up dredging, then you're just going to remove them that way. And you're just grubbing them out when they're growing in the spring. But I don't think David's going to be grubbing that patch out over there.
And I think, Reed, we can point out that the taller the cattail, the deeper the sediment is likely to be in your pond. That's just a rough approximation. So this has about 18 inches of sediment in it, which we will hopefully get out this summer.
Yeah, that's a good indicator. The definitely the other thing that I usually mention is the water depth in your pond. If you have over 16 inches, that usually prevents cattail growth. So that's just another indicator to look for. If you have a kind of a deeper pond, maybe you've avoided cattails altogether, but you'll see them start to come once you're usually around the inlets as that sediment builds up and you start to have less than 16 inches. Some vegetation that works well around ponds to enhance habitat and kind of add some aesthetic appeal would be sedges, salal, ferns, rush. These are all nice low growing native plants with less biomass, and it's nice to have a little habitat feature around your pond if you have the opportunity to do so. They're a nice area of the neighborhood with some water, and they can be enhanced to work really well for the local habitat. So moving on to the control structure. Diane gave you guys a little overview, but we'll go into a little bit more of the details of how it works. And what to look for. And so on this picture here, you can see this is called the shear grate handle. And this is so you can actually bypass the control structure. This is something we typically like to test when we do an inspection, make sure that it's going to operate in case there's emergency. This is typically, if there ever was an emergency, you'd already want to be talking with the city, whoever's the agency for your pond, or government that's in charge of your pond. Tell them you're having a problem and that maybe the solution is going to be to let some water get out of the pond. And this is one way to do it. Also used for when you need to drain the pond to do a dredging or cleaning, but they tend to get frozen up. So you just give it a quick yank, make sure it'll release, and then let it back down. And here at the bottom of the standpipe is the orifice plate, and that's where the controlled release happens from. So this is a small diameter hole at the bottom, which as the water comes in, it has to flow up through that and then to the outlet. Here's a couple more pictures. And as the water goes up, it reaches different orifices. So if it's not all, if there's a big rain event, so as the water rises, it'll start to dump more water out of larger orifices until at the top of the standpipe, usually just will pour right over the top to the outlet. In this photo here, this is actually a little extra inspection plate, and that would be just because since the standpipe's kind of offset, opening that would allow you to put a probe down there and check the orifice plate, make sure there's nothing clogging it. Sometimes you can just poke your chimney sweeping rod or probe down that hole, and you can poke it down through the orifice. That would help to clear it out. Other times it's kind of obstructed by the rim of the manhole, and you have to be a bit more creative, but don't crawl down there. This is a good example of how this works as the water level rises. So I'll try to go through it pretty quick. So prior to the rain event, everything's dry. As it starts to rain, our catch basin's filling up, and then we have water starting to travel through that orifice out the outlet. This is a typical kind of smaller rain event, and then if it keeps on raining, it's going to overwhelm the orifice plate. Then it's going to come through this overflow orifice, and then eventually we're just dumping right down the top of the standpipe. So inspect your control structure annually and after large storms. And this is one that's really good to keep an eye on those pond levels, because after a storm, if it's pretty easy to tell if the pond's higher than normal, and most likely you're going to be dealing with some issue at your control structure or at the outlet. Maybe the trash racks clogged leading to the control structure. The maintenance practices for your control structure: check the ring and cover, make sure the grouting is intact. Sometimes those rings kind of move around over the top of the manhole. So anchor them down with some grout. Just like we discussed the type 2s that control structure is housed in, you want to check for sediment up when it reaches 1/3 of the sump depth. That should be removed, or within 12 inches of that orifice plate. And also keep an eye out for any debris and trash, get that out. And then, as we discussed, checking that shear gate and when there hasn't been a storm for a while, you'd expect the water level should be right about the bottom of that shear gate opening. That would be your typical pond level. If you're seeing something else, it could be that the orifice is clogged or something else is going on. This picture here shows a tub line. So this one, maybe the orifice plate was clogged for a while. They had high ponding levels. Here's an example of probably some pond maintenance that went on and they didn't remove the vegetation. This is something you really want to avoid because it's going to be more costly and difficult to remove once it's gone into that outlet pipe. Moving on to vaults. This one, very similar to, it kind of serves the same purpose as a pond, only you could make a parking lot over the top of it rather than setting aside a lot of land to have a pond feature. So all underground, but has manhole access, again, confined space. So no business being down there without training. And then we have a control structure, just like you'd have housed in a type 2 on a pond, and all of those same considerations for maintenance. Checking it annually and after major storms. And you have the shear gate, just like on the pond control structure, all the same considerations. For bioswales, we want to inspect quarterly and after large storms. Mostly vegetation management in a bioswale, checking for any excess sediment, any erosion, and then depending on your bioswale, you may have it's a lot of native plants, or you might have just grass. There's a lot of options there, but you'll want to make sure that you don't have any large inappropriate plants or invasive plants that might block the flow of water. And then keep an eye out. The bioswale will have an inlet and an outlet, typically making sure those pipe openings are clear and not becoming clogged with sediment or debris. And bioretention and rain gardens, we really a lot of the same maintenance considerations as a bioswale, just checking for trash, making sure you've got the desirable native species and not having any invasive species or large trees growing where you don't want them. On rain gardens, it's also, they usually have kind of curb cuts and sometimes there's a drainage, an outlet pipe, depending on their design. And those are areas to watch for sediment buildup, clear out that so that the water can flow. Access control, just maintaining your fences, removing any poisonous plants. Blackberries are a common issue for access in these stormwater ponds. They just tend to grow over the berm, and then you can't inspect the berm anymore or gain access to the control structure without cutting down all your blackberries. So it's good to stay on top of that. And then also, a lot of times these ponds are in people's backyards. So you tend to see people dumping yard waste over the fence, which we don't want that yard waste becoming sediment in the bottom of the pond that you then have to remove. So talk to your neighbors and keep an eye out for that blackberry creeping in. Talk a little more about invasive vegetation. Some of the biggest problems that I see is the blackberry, but also we have knotweed, which can really cause some erosion issues in the way it grows. And then English ivy just crowds things out, and it's best to go after these things in the spring, early summer, before they go to seed. You can usually control all these pretty well just by pulling out small plants before they get larger, and manually removing blackberries and other problem plants with weed whackers and chainsaws. Let's see, at the bottom there, I have a link to a current weed list for Whatcom County, and that'd be relevant for what you find in Skagit as well. An inspection on invasive vegetation semi-annually and during the growing season. Right. After the control structure, your stormwater is leaving your site and moving on to sometimes a ditch, but a lot of times directly right into a stream. So you want to make sure, even usually this might not even be on your property, but it's a good place to go out to the road or find out where that discharge is and make sure that it's properly rocked, you don't have erosion in that area. And if you're seeing sediment there, that means it's coming out of your facility. So you'll want to determine why sediment's not being trapped or further up the system. And if you don't know where your discharge goes, it'd be a good thing to think about that and share that with your neighbors so that you all have that connection of what your pond flows to what stream, and then to the Skagit or ultimately to the Puget Sound. So it's always good to keep that connectivity in mind and why we want to have the best water that we can leaving our systems. Don't want that kind of thing going on. So I know Christy will give you guys some good advice on some ways to get involved, but there is a lot that can be done within your neighborhood, just amongst your neighbors, without consulting and bringing in the professionals. So grass cutting and brush clearing, trash rack clearing, cattail and brush removal, garbage cleanups, fence and signage upkeep, cleaning the catch basin grates, like when you're out walking the dog, observing those seasonal pond conditions. That's a big one. Catching that early is important to prevent erosion. Your pond levels are, your pond's designed to be at a certain level. So when it is at an elevated level for an extended amount of time, that can lead to erosion around the pond in places you don't want. Control access to unauthorized uses, preventing dumping of yard waste, keeping leaves and bark out of the street, requesting street sweeping and catch basin cleaning if you noticed it's needed, and also watching out for runoff from construction piles in your neighborhood. Some of the safety concerns, you've got the confined spaces we discussed, steep and slippery slopes, insects and poisonous plants, lifting and exertion, and proper use of any heavy equipment or power equipment you might have to use. What should professionals do? Well, the vault inspections and cleaning should be done, especially with the confined spaces, by professionals. Any pesticide application, large vegetation removal, sediment removal, any structural or plumbing repairs. And if you're interested in providing some habitat and having a nice aesthetically looking pond, then might be a good thing to ask a professional to help pick out the right plants and design a planting program. So your liabilities, there's personal injury on the property, damage to public or private property, and if you had a berm failure or something of that nature, and then regulatory as far as proper maintenance, allowing you to have good water quality and not affecting habitat. For record keeping, it's typically you're going to want to have some kind of a report annually, depending on your requirements where you live. And so take photos of anything you see, report any problems to managers, and keep everything in a file. For planning current and future needs, it's understand the condition of your facilities and how they function over time, identify any ongoing and major maintenance requirements, understand your liabilities and water quality concerns. Consider those enhancements if there's opportunities to maybe add some more habitat, get some nice native plants in there. Seek support from neighbors and members, and develop a simple plan with a prioritized list of activities and projects. Some ideas for budgeting and future needs. Evaluate what you can do versus what should be contracted. Prioritize, solicit estimates from different contractors. Develop some different budget scenarios. Go get support and approval from the city or wherever your pond is located. Do your annual assessment, implement the plan, and then review your plan and facility conditions each year. So by now we all know that maintaining our system is going to help us save money over the long run. And we're also going to protect water quality and protect downstream property from flooding and erosion. A nice stormwater pond can retain and enhance your property value, make your neighborhood a nice, aesthetically pleasing area, and provide a green space amenity. So there is some potential there to make some improvements to your neighborhood. Maybe the pond is something that's not even accessible, but could be maybe a nice, fun place for the community to gather and watch nature. So if you guys have any questions, I'm happy to take them along with our other presenters. I'm going to check in with Christy. Do you want to get going on yours before we do questions, Christy, or shall we take a round?
Oh, well, maybe I should go through it, then we can just focus on questions. How's that?
That sounds good.
Okay. So I guess I can. Okay. So I'm just going to do a little wrap up and then we'll get to questions. I'm sure some of you still have questions about maintaining your pond. And I would just like to emphasize again what Reed mentioned about the importance of keeping records, documenting photos and observing your detention pond. And, if you can involve, if you're in an HOA, getting your neighbors involved and maybe inspired to help take care of that detention pond and help with maintenance. it can be, a great neighborhood experience, and fun if you can share the work and work together in keeping things um, in good order for you. So I think Diane had mentioned a little bit, we talked about stormwater, and these are some ways that your neighborhood can also become involved in helping keep the water clean, but that before it goes into your detention pond, which can cut down on a lot of issues that you might have to deal with your pond in the future. And also it helps protect our streams and rivers and our marine waters. So when it rains, the rainwater or snow melt or even a sprinkler, the rainwater will pick up and transport any of the pollutants it encounters. And of course, on our streets and sidewalks and our yards, there's a variety of different things that water can pick up and carry into that detention pond. And like oil and grease and metals from our cars, yard and garden chemicals, bacteria, sediment, nutrients, pet and livestock waste, and other pollutants that can be on paved areas. So where does your stormwater go? The majority of our community, the runoff that leaves our homes and our neighborhoods runs directly into a local stream eventually. So it goes through the storm drain. And if you're in an HOA neighborhood, into your detention pond facility, and then out to a drainage ditch or creek that will flow eventually out into one of our marine waters. It does not go to the waste treatment plant. You can see on this pipe system here that carries everything from our house, that's inside our house, our wastewater from our toilets and sinks and showers, that goes to the waste treatment plant. But the majority of our community, as far as the runoff from our property, it does not get treated. So the way we landscape and what we do in our own backyard affects water quality and habitat in our streams, rivers, and marine waters, and can cause, shellfish closures and downgrades, swimming closures. So we don't have all the recreational uses that we love so much and what we cherish and value in our community. So here's just some ideas that you can do to help reduce stormwater runoff. And if you can share this information in your neighborhoods and get everybody on board, that is excellent. So never dump anything down a storm drain or in ditches. This actually is a common problem. People will dump oil or paint or different things and they just think it disappears or maybe goes to the waste treatment plant. But as mentioned, these storm drains on your corners of your neighborhood, it's not treated and it goes eventually directly to a stream or river. So you don't want to dump anything down there, just spraying down the drain. Checking your car for leaking fluids and recycling motor oil if you change it yourself. And don't litter. Pick up trash you see on the ground. And that's another fun way you can get the children and youth in your neighborhood involved as well. Picking up after our pets. The estimated daily production of dog waste in our county is over 6,135 pounds per day. So it's, while one dog may not be the problem, it's cumulative impacts of all of us with our pets that we love so dearly. So the solution is fairly simple. Pick it up, scoop it, bag it, and put it in the trash. And another little tip, instead of hosing down our driveways and sidewalks, is to get the broom out and sweep, so we're not adding extra pollutants down the storm drains and into that detention pond. directing our downspouts and gutters into our lawn and plant beds or into a rain barrel, those are kind of fun to have, cisterns or a contained area. Reducing our use for fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides. I don't use any of those things in my yard anymore and have relied on just using compost and mulch in the garden. And I might say my flower beds are quite lovely. So I've been gardening for pollinators. It's been a lot of fun. Reducing the size of your lawn, adding more trees, shrubs, and plants, and consider incorporating some native plants. So not only does it reduce the use of having to use chemicals, but the plants also help absorb runoff, and so we can also replenish our groundwater, which sometimes when we have a lot of impervious surfaces, then our groundwater isn't getting recharged. So there's a lot of great benefits to that. And then supporting low impact development in our community. And you can learn more about that just by Googling low impact development. And those are things like rain gardens, bioswales, using permeable pavement, green roofs. I know there's at least one person on here at this session that has a green roof on her boathouse in Anacortes. And so that's really fun. So these are ways we can help reduce the amount of runoff and reduce impacts to our waters, keep it clean and healthy. So here's a few fun pictures of, these are all in Skagit County, of neighbors who have incorporated more plants in their landscape. And here's just a few pictures of, these are local as well. The Bayview United Methodist Church put in a beautiful rain garden a few years back and a hedgerow, got rid of all the blackberries and planted a native plant hedgerow in the rain garden. And then using rain barrels so you can use that water to water in the summer. And this is a friend of mine in Anacortes. She has this, actually around here, having a big system like this is ideal if you can. So there's a lot of good reasons to garden sustainably. Our population continues to grow, and as we continue to grow, it puts more pressure on our soils, our water, our forests, and our other natural resources in our community. So we can help offset that by gardening and how we garden and take care of our own backyards. And unfortunately, if prevention is the best way, because it becomes very difficult, very expensive, and sometimes even impossible to duplicate those natural services once they've been destroyed. So protection is the way to go if we can. And then just to throw out there, because this has happened in a lot of areas, people empty their aquariums into a stormwater detention pond or a lake. And the milfoil that's usually in most aquariums is very bad thing to have in our local waters. It grows really quickly and it blocks sunlight. It draws mosquitoes, and it also kills off some of the native aquatic plants that we want in our water. Will choke them out, and it can be a huge problem and can actually take over a whole lake in just a matter of a couple, 2-3 years. So make sure nobody empties their aquariums in your detention pond. It'll just give you more headaches. And then again, just kind of in wrapping up, consider having neighborhood cleanup events to involve the neighbors and get the youth involved. And we have these storm drain labels if you don't have them in your neighborhood already. So that program, we have the the decals and everything you need to put these on your storm drains to remind people not to dump down the storm drain, only rain down the drain. So that's all free. So you can just contact my office, and my coworker Cindy would be happy to set you up with however many you need. And that's another great way to involve your kids in the neighborhood as well. And I'm just going to end with this couple of quotes that even I mentioned, involving the kids, because they're great stewards and it's just they'll be taking care of this beautiful county we live in down the road. And so getting them involved now is just, they love it, for one thing. Even the smallest person can change the course of the future. Bilbo Baggins said that in The Hobbit. And this is why I care. These are my grandkids, and I want them to be able to enjoy all the wonderful beauty that I love so much about living here. And then I'll just end with this. I never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And that was from Margaret Mead. And I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight. And we're happy to take more questions. We hope we gave you some resources and information that you'll find helpful. I know it's a big chore taking care of those detention ponds. And David Roberts, who is on here, he has a story too that of his neighborhood that he moved into, and all the problems they had, and how they were able to get their neighborhood involved in addressing the problems with their pond. So he's a good resource as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions.
Yep, we've got a few questions here, Christy. Thank
Okay.
you, and thank you, Reed, as well. Diane, great job on all of you on your presentations. So a couple of questions here. One was from Cindy, and feel free to put more in the chat if you have them. I'm capturing those. Cindy asked about, with all the dry summer weather we've had, will it make the soils more hydrophobic, and will it take longer for the detention ponds to drain at first after a large rain event?
I think we could assume that it would, but it'll still function as it was designed. It'll hold that water back and let the pollutants fall out, and then drain over. A dry pond should drain in about 3 days, typically. But it always depends on the particular pond, so that's why it's good to be familiar with what to expect for your particular pond, and then keeping an eye out for when you do see something, go check the outlet and then looking in the control structure.
Now, obviously, the soils are going to soak up the water first into the soil, and then they'll start to pond the water. So you'll actually have initially a little more storage, and then once the soils are saturated, that will be the standard that you'll have through the wintertime, basically the capacity. Sydney asked, and she lives in Cedro Woolley in an HOA. She's struggling to find a reputable Vector company to help with her cleaning out of her catch basins. And David Lee responded to say, give him a ring. So I would assume that any of your stormwater managers for the different communities will have some lists of people who can help you, at least with numbers to call. Some of them are more responsive, I have found, than others. So you may have to call a couple of them to get somebody to show up. And then Andrew made a great comment, because Reed showed you all a picture of Japanese knotweed. This is super nasty stuff, and simply weed whacking that only makes the problem worse. So He is saying call for technical assistance, Skagit County's noxious weed program. And he put the number there in the chat. It's 360-416-1467. So you don't want to be weed whacking, and you don't want to be putting it in the compost, any of that. It's got to be handled very specifically. So, and you can see knotweed based on what Reed's picture there. It has that very distinctive whitish yellow flower on it. Very nasty stuff. So not poisonous, but spreads like wildfire.
Yeah, and it spreads by a rhizome. So typically you start with a small stand 1 year, and every year it just keeps growing its footprint until you start to manage it. And one option is removing the material, bagging that, making sure it's not going back into the environment. And over time, if you're staying on top of that, they say that you can kind of starve out the root system, but it takes a lot of management. It's very intensive. And also where it does flower, that's another time to try not to let it get to flower, because it can spread by seed, I believe. So with any weeds that you're trying to control, get them before they flower.
So it looks like Laura had one more question. Do we clean the catch basins in our street gutters? Well, that's going to depend on if you own those catch basins or not. So the street, if it's a private street, I'd mind answering for you, Diane, since that's a common.
Oh,
way.
you got it.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was going to say.
You need to look at your ownership information and your plat map, and it will show whether you actually own the street in your neighborhood or not. If you do, then you own those catch basins and it's your responsibility. But most homeowner associations have public streets in them, and that would mean that whatever your local jurisdiction is would be the one that's in charge of cleaning those.
And if you're not sure, you can call your local jurisdiction and say, this is my address. Are we responsible for these catch basins, or are you? And if you have concerns and they're responsible, they'll come out and take a look.
What I've seen in a lot of systems, you've got a large layout of conveyance pipes and catch basins in the street, and then those all are going to lead to the low point where the pond is. Once you get to the pond, that is typically not maintained by the city. That's going to be the HOA's responsibility. And you'll have a few catch basins associated with the pond that are not part of the street. So a lot of times the HOA might have 20, 30 catch basins in the neighborhood, but they'll be responsible for the 1 or 2 that are in the pond facility area, usually behind the fence. There might be one prior to the inlet. A lot of times you see one just before the inlet, and that's also a catch basin to regularly pay attention to maintenance wise, because once that catch basin's full, any sediment that's reaching that basin then starts flowing into your pond. And it could be, don't know how your pond is, but it's probably going to be easier to remove sediment from that catch basin than to let it continue to fill into your pond. So one of the goals is to always try to prolong the time between needing to dredge these ponds, and that's all through proper maintenance of the system upstream, keeping the catch basins under that 60%, and watching for sediment on the streets that's going to ultimately end up in the catch basins, and people blowing or sweeping the debris out into the street. Those are things to watch for, because it ultimately ends up in the pond, which then becomes everybody's responsibility to chip in and get removed.
So Cindy made a good point, and I think Reed talked about when you're walking your dogs. I know it's kind of an icky thing, but when the leaves and so forth are collecting on your top of your catch basin grate, that can actually block the water from going down in the grate. And so that what that does is that's just shunting more and more water down to the next catch basin, and can overflow into yards and various things. So the easiest thing is when you're walking around to be able to just pull leaves and debris away from the catch basin so that the grates, so that they ultimately can take the water. And anything that you keep from going in that catch basin, of course, then stays out of your pond, which is a good thing later. One of the things we have in our neighborhood, which is a steep neighborhood, we have for years had sanding of our streets. And finally, I realized in an inspection that all of that sand had gone down and filled up a giant catch basin at the bottom of the hill. And then because it filled it up to capacity, it went right into our pond. And so now I have a beautiful sand dune right at the head of my upper pond, which grows cattails like crazy. And so my calling the county, my case, and saying, look, we want sand because it's steep, but we want you to come and sweep it up as soon as the ice is off. And they've been religious about it now because they know they've created a little bit of a problem for me. The last question I have right now anyway is, do you have any suggestions for vegetation on steep pond sides? I'll leave it to Reed and Diane, and then I can provide a perspective for my pond if you want.
Yeah, there's lots of options, and it's kind of a trade-off of simplicity of maintenance, but grass will grow most places. So your first idea would be get rid of any of the bare soils find a grass that will grow in the proper conditions, whether it's sunny, wet, or shady. And then on top of that, there's lots of good low growing native plants to help stabilize that bank. But one thing to keep in mind would be probably something that's evergreen and going to be year round. A lot of deciduous plants would during the raining season aren't going to provide much cover or help with erosion, as they don't have any leaves, to kind of break up that rain energy. So stuff like ferns and that salal and sedges and rush. It's let's see, trying to think of some good. I think Whatcom County. If you go to the website, there's some great resources for native plants. And as you're doing research on native plants, just keep in mind, the plant requirements, usually around a pond that's going to be a little bit wetter, and don't know what your considerations are for sunlight, but it takes a little research to find what's going to work best in your particular area. Grass first being the simplest, but then lots of options with natives.
And of course, we want to avoid anything woody. So you don't want any woody kinds of plants, because that becomes much more difficult to maintain over time. I think that's it. Does anybody else have anything they want to just like chirp up and ask or anything? Anybody have any thoughts on how this went tonight? Laura, thank you. Yeah, Becky, Leslie, thank you very much. Paul, thank you. Well, this is one of the biggest programs we've done in about 7 years, to have this many people. So I, as a former president of my neighborhood association and board member for many years, I commend you all for being here and showing interest in this. As boards turn over and we have different people involved, I really appreciate that the county does these trainings over and over again, because it's one of your biggest assets in a neighborhood association that's mostly understated. And if you stopped and thought about what it would take to construct your stormwater facility today, or if you had to make a major repair. So I urge you all to think about long-term capital savings. It's a huge investment, and you can't understate the importance of taking care of it. I'll commend you all. Thanks for being here tonight. Christy, do you have any last words?
No, just thank you all for being there here. And if you have questions that come up, please feel free to email me and I can get the word out if I need to go to David or Reed or Diane or one of the others with the, I can pass that along.